Hello and welcome to episode 4 of 5-Year Windows on the My Movie Gold YouTube channel. I'm your host, Kyle McNevin. Each week this series focuses on a specific 5-year period of an actor's career by looking at all of their movies released during that time. On this week's episode, we'll be looking at the career of Jennifer Lopez from 2000 to 2004, specifically her movie career, since she did have quite a bit going on during this period on some other fronts. I wanted to do an episode centered around Lopez because that transition from music to movies can be really difficult. And there's always going to be a period where the production system is figuring out how they want to use that particular star in movies. They're wondering, what is their persona in this new medium? The period of time that we're going to cover isn't about her first big breakout onto the scene. That had already happened in 1997 when Jennifer Lopez portrayed real-life singer Selena Quintanilla in the movie Selena. The movie received positive reviews, along with Lopez being lauded for having the cinematic chops to be a force to be reckoned with. She would make a few other appearances after Selena, but this specific period of 2000 to 2004 is where Hollywood is trying to see what kind of projects that Lopez is going to pop in. We'll see based on the type of projects that there is some variety to what she is trying her hand at, but not unsimilar to a lot of other actresses at this time. She's getting pegged as the romantic lead a lot. In at least 5 of those 8 roles, her primary relationship to the movie is vetted through her male co-star. Lopez is able to go beyond that though, because she is a magnetic screen presence that allows her to fill out some of these characters and doesn't allow these characters to get swallowed up despite some of the lack of ingenuity in the writing that she's being provided. There will be 8 movies we're talking about today, so beware of spoilers for the following movies: The Cell, The Wedding Planner, Angel Eyes, Enough, Made in Manhattan, Geely, Jersey Girl, and Shall We Dance. The first movie for Lopez during this time was The Cell, directed by Tarsem Singh and premiering on August 18th, 2000. Before hitting play on this, the first thing that stood out to me is that I noticed it was rated R, which sure, there's nothing wrong with that, but one of the rationales was for bizarre violence. I'm sure I've seen movies with the reasoning before, but I have to say I was a little thrown off and intimidated about what this bizarre violence may look like. I can report back and say with full confidence, the violence in this movie truly is bizarre. The Cell is set in a futuristic society where Jennifer Lopez plays a social worker that is adept at using experimental technology to enter the minds of her patients, and she eventually gets wrapped into entering the mind of a serial killer in hopes of trying to track down the location of his latest victim. I say this in the nicest way possible, but we're looking at a lot of movie here. We don't just have a serial killer thriller, which already commands a certain degree of complexity, but this is also set in a futuristic society, and that commands a certain elevated set design expectation. Then on top of that, we're dealing with a large chunk of the movie being set in someone's mind, where the imagery is dialed up to 12 at all times. Lopez even praised working with Singh, saying, quote, he had such an idea of what these bizarre images that he wanted to put in there, and kind of going inside the mind of a serial killer and what that would look like, end quote. There's that key word of bizarre again. All of these challenges that I mentioned are why I'm impressed with how Lopez is able to deliver a fairly solid performance with all of what's going on around her. Most of what she's being asked to do is operate in these more fantastical spaces, where she's able to continue exuding this natural confidence, but she's also able to nail the emotional moments despite having to work around a lot of visual flourishes. Lopez is gone for large chunks of the movies, but I still see this as a good showcase for her because it allows her to operate within this action-adventure genre and kind of showing that versatility that she hadn't had a great opportunity to do yet, unless you count Anaconda. But still, there is some value in a movie like this that, on the surface, may kind of seem a little schlocky, but for me, it's a good Lopez movie. Which now brings us to the January 26, 2001 premiere of The Wedding Planner, directed by Adam Shankman. I had seen this before, and let's just say I didn't have the fondest memories. However, it had been a few years, and the reasons why the movie didn't work for me didn't exactly come to the top of my mind. The Wedding Planner is a fairly traditional rom-com where Lopez plays a wedding planner, but ends up falling for the future groom of one of her clients, played by Matthew McConaughey. The beginning part of the movie where we are getting to see Lopez be amazing at her job is the high point for me. It's everything else that leaves me a little uneasy about what this is actually getting at. She does have some good chemistry with McConaughey, admittedly, but this is a relationship with a man who is not only in a relationship, but he's engaged to be married quite soon. When they're having one of their let's hash it out relationship conversations that happens in every kind of rom-com, McConaughey tries to justify his interest in Lopez, despite being engaged, as essentially, I'm just being a guy. If you're going to strap your movie with the burden that one of your leads is already engaged, then I really need you to do better than that. There are also some elements that haven't exactly aged well. especially for me as the character of Maximo, who is a recent immigrant from Italy to the US. This really leans into the trope of a naive immigrant, and it's really tough to watch, and honestly does take away from the movie for me in a huge way. I'm not trying to justify anyone's innocence in this scenario, but when focusing just on the performance from Lopez, she's doing the job that's asked from her. She's owning in all of the scenes where she's supposed to, especially as the wedding planner. But I wish the movie would actually let me want for her to end up with McConaughey. But that was just a step too far for me. We'll get to see some better instances where she's afforded some better material to work with. But honestly, it's gonna get worse too. A few months later, on May 18th, 2001, Angel Eyes from Luis Mondacchi made its US premiere. Angel Eyes features Jennifer Lopez as a New York City police officer, and a mysterious character, played by Jim Caviezel, begins to take an interest in her. This is a case where the focus of this does end up being about the romantic entanglement of Lopez and Caviezel, but this is one of those cases where this does have some other interests that make this feel like we have two main characters that have actual lives and struggles. The movie does wait a while into the story to get into the more secretive nature of both Lopez and Caviezel's personal lives. But for me, it does pay off in being worth it for what it affords the story. Without getting too in the nitty-gritty, Lopez is dealing with some family situations that have caused some of the more important people in her life to turn on her. In some of these moments, she gets to be incredibly determined and believable, quite frankly, because she is so dead set on the fact that she was right for the decisions that she made. That determination ends up causing some strife in her budding romance with Caviezel, because she wants him to really just get over some of the personal traumas that he's had. She sees that trauma as just an obstacle you can overcome if you put your mind to it enough. She definitely doesn't come off well in those scenes, but I think that's endearing for the movie's sake, because it doesn't keep her up on this pedestal. It's allowed to embrace the fact that this is a person that has made some mistakes and still struggles in those interpersonal conversations. Lopez gets to shine in those murky moments because she doesn't get to have it all figured out. There gets to be some moments of introspection that invites the audience in for some empathy. Lopez and Caviezel are admittedly not two people that I think of right off the top of my head when I'm confident that a romantic relationship will work on screen. Apparently, Lopez is pretty confident though, because she apparently saw his performance in Thin Red Line, where she noticed a quiet intensity, she said, that certainly translates to this movie as well, and makes for a dynamic that doesn't feel comfortable for the audience because you're unsure of what his intentions really are. Is he up to something, or is he just actually interested in her? I actually see that as a positive because this genre can be too reliant on its usual trappings, that Angel Eyes ends up offering a nice change of pace and, again, a good Jennifer Lopez performance. Her first outing in 2002 came on May 24th, 2002, with the release of Enough, directed by Michael Apted. Enough is about a woman, played by Lopez, that plots her escape from her abusive husband, played by Billy Campbell. I wasn't aware of the movie's reputation before seeing it, but just reading the log line, I felt like I knew what to expect. On the narrative and stylistic front at least, I feel like this held mostly true. Except maybe for the fact that the movie insisted upon putting a title card up every 5 minutes with a vague phrase alluding to what may happen next. The title cards continued to happen for the first 45 minutes to an hour in, pretty much to the point where I thought they were going to stay in play for the entire time, which I kind of would have appreciated the boldness of that move, but then all of a sudden they stopped happening and the last hour or so played out normally. The one X factor here that did make this worth watching is how good Lopez is through all of the different phases of the narrative. First, Lopez gets to play the falling in love with her partner portion. Then we get the leery wife that thinks her husband may be up to something and ends up finding out he's cheating on her. Then we get the wife trying to plan her escape after her husband starts abusing her. And finally we get survivalist J-Lo, who is on the run with her daughter that will do anything to keep her safe. All of these phases are supported by how creepy Billy Campbell is in this performance, that you are convinced he's going to stop at nothing as well to try and get his wife back one way or another. As you might guess, this is going to end with Lopez going through some intense training montages where she learns how to defend herself, and leads to her being able to have one last confrontation with her ex-husband before she is able to dispatch of him. I understand that there's that satisfying conclusion that everyone wants to see, and I have to admit that there is some satisfaction in watching it. But I do wish that there was another way for it to feel like a fulfilling narrative for Lopez, where she gets the upper hand over him without it being resorted to an act of violence, like he had exacted upon her. The upside to this, though, is that the role did provide her with the most well-actualized character that gets to show off those skills. We get a little bit of romance, we get a little bit of action in those fight scenes, but most importantly for me, is we get a dramatic turn for her that she doesn't get to show off as much, and it's something that I would like to see more of. I see this as further validation that she could have thrived in these type of roles if this is what Hollywood would have continued to offer her. Nonetheless, I appreciate that she got the opportunity that she did and proved that she can do it. Shocker, she's J-Lo. The next movie for Lopez in this period was Made in Manhattan, directed by Wayne Wong and premiering on December 13th, 2002. Made in Manhattan is about a maid, played by Jennifer Lopez, who works at a fancy hotel in Manhattan, and in an occurrence of mistaken identity, a politician, played by Ralph Fiennes, thinks she is a socialite and takes a liking to her. Of the movies I hadn't seen, this was the one I was actually most excited to see. The idea of Lopez pairing up with Ralph Fiennes in a rom-com didn't really have to be particularly good for me to know that I was going to be able to derive at least some base level enjoyment from this. For the most part, that ended up being true, as this didn't really rise to any new unexpected heights, but that's not the goal of everything you watch. Lopez and Fiennes are by no means jumping off the screen with their chemistry, but they are both being charming in their own individual ways that doesn't allow you to get bored at any point. The real pop of the movie for me is getting to see the interplay between all of the members of the hotel staff and their relationships. It's hard to remain cold-hearted when you see the staff bonding together to try and help Lopez maintain the ruse with Fiennes, and all risking their jobs for that pursuit. It's nice that since I wasn't exactly into the Lopez and Fiennes interplay, that the interactions of the staff were really able to provide the heart for the movie. I would also be remiss if I didn't bring up the fascination of Jennifer Lopez's son in this movie. The child is a walking Richard Nixon encyclopedia. You may say to yourself, well, how does that come into play in a movie like this? Well, her son needs to meet Ralph Fiennes in an elevator at one point, and they need something to talk about. So why not Richard Nixon? It's a strange choice, but it does give the movie a distinct personality that I can't hold against it. This now brings us to the moment we've all been waiting for. August 1st, 2003, and the release of Geely from director Martin Brest. The one silver lining that I will take from watching this is that this wasn't a rewatch that I had to endure. This was a first-time watch that got to surprise and horrify me around every turn. Now I'm going to describe the plot of Geely, and I promise that I am not exaggerating any of this. Geely is about a man, played by Ben Affleck, that is assigned by a crime boss to kidnap the mentally handicapped brother of the district attorney. But after the kidnapping, Jennifer Lopez is sent in to make sure that he doesn't mess anything up. After watching this, I thought to myself, did the people making this movie think that they were onto something good? So I found an interview with Affleck from last year actually where he said, quote, "Very few people actually saw the movie. It doesn't work. By the way, it's sort of a horse's head on a cow's body. And the studio at the time, because I had begun having this relationship with Lopez, it was selling a lot of magazines and appeared to generate a lot of enthusiasm, and they just predictably latched onto it. They want a romantic comedy and they want the two of us together." End quote. I guess I understand that there was a fascination out there of wanting to see Lopez and Affleck share the screen together, but this is not the way for this to happen. This isn't a case where I don't want to talk about the specifics of plot points because I don't want to ruin the sanctity of a first-time watch for someone. But having to quote some of the lines that come out of Ben Affleck's mouth in this movie is going to make me feel more gross than anything else, so I'm going to stop myself there. There really isn't anything fun about watching the two of them share the screen. I do think the movie knows that it's not agreeing with the filth coming from Affleck. And there is an attempted personal redemption arc for him, but it's far too late, and that personal turnaround doesn't automatically make him compelling to watch on screen. That's a lot about Affleck, because I wanted to set the stage for what Lopez is being saddled with here. The main part of her personality that this movie wants to focus on is that she's a lesbian that keeps denying Affleck in his sexual advances, but he's determined that there might be a way to change her mind. I know that plot point is unfortunately not totally foreign to this time period, but the movie isn't dialoguing enough with how gross that concept is. Whenever the movie seems like it might want to go deeper, it actually just wants to have more comedic fun with it and take it to another level. Unfortunately, not a lot can be gleaned for Lopez here from watching Geely, but Geely gets to be a shining example of a piece of art that is wanting to provoke the audience just for the sake of it. In the last year of this 5-year window, Lopez released 2 movies. The first was Jersey Girl, directed by Kevin Smith and released on May 26, 2004. Jersey Girl tells the story of a man, played by Ben Affleck, that is a single father following the death of his wife and his journey to dealing with that still present grief. What I didn't know about the movie is that Lopez plays the dead wife in this circumstance, so it isn't a huge role for her. But I will say that in those first 10 minutes, Affleck and Lopez are infinitely more pleasing to watch on screen than Geely, because they actually seem like two people that have lived on the planet Earth for a period of time. It feels real in a lot of ways. We get to have Lopez setting him straight a couple of times, and mainly emphasizing the point that Affleck needs to find a work-life balance and that his new child is going to be the priority in these circumstances. That conceit ends up as a through line throughout the movie, and her words do still get to echo as the backbone for that narrative, so she is a part of the movie in a certain way. I know that's not the story being told here, but a movie that focuses on new parents Affleck and Lopez would work immensely more for me than the new relationship that Affleck ends up forming with the video store clerk Liv Tyler. But the counter-argument for why this movie exists is that it did give the classic quote from Liv Tyler's character, quote, "We're gonna have some sex," end quote. Speaking more generally, not everything is working here for me. But for instance, when Affleck gets to lean into how broken he is as a human following the devastating death, I think he's firing on all cylinders. The stuff with his daughter isn't exactly my favorite, primarily because it's leaning too far into the overly precocious child typecasting. Let's be real, this movie's idea of a charming child is one that constantly forgets to flush the toilet. If you have a spare 10 minutes, give Jersey Girl a watch. And then maybe come back later if the rest of that sounds appealing to you. Her final movie of this run comes on October 15th, 2004 with the release of Shall We Dance from director Peter Chelsom. Shall We Dance is about a middle-aged man, played by Richard Gere, that begins taking an interest in taking ballroom dancing classes. You'll notice that I didn't include Jennifer Lopez's character in that summary, and that's because she plays a very confounding role in the movie. So she does play one of the dance instructors at the studio, and she has this relationship with Gere where it's a little unclear if he has a romantic interest or what the motivation really is. There is a somewhat sweet scene where Gere expresses to her that he saw her dancing in a window and that inspired him to give it a try. Clearly that's pretty cheesy, but the movie leans into that sincerity. Watching the movie for the first time, you are ready for some big reveal of a nefarious reason of why is Richard Gere taking up ballroom dancing? At the very least, we're prepared for the conversation where Gere admits that he's unhappy with his life. The movie plays up the mystery all the way until the last 20 minutes, before we finally get to Gere vocalizing that he ballroom dances because he wants something more from his life. And the reason that he didn't express it is that he feels guilty because he was ashamed of wanting to be happier when he already has a pretty objectively good life. When that ends up happening, that sentiment really hit for me. But I looked at the runtime and knew that we only had 15 minutes left and knew that there was no way that they were going to explore this anymore, and I was disappointed. The other disappointing part is that Lopez doesn't get a ton to do here other than showing off her dancing skills. And a couple of those smaller conversations with Gere where they talk about their visions for life are good, but there's just not enough of that to grab onto. Admittedly, she is good in those scenes and she has a good rapport with Gere. But again, it leaves you wanting more for what Lopez could be doing with something meatier. To leave it on a more positive note though, if you've ever been looking for a movie where Richard Jenkins and Nick Cannon get to play a private investigator duo, I may have the movie for you. Unfortunately, none of the roles during this time span for Lopez are really on par with what she was doing in Selena. But I do think this is an important period because the one thing that's obvious in all 8 of these movies is that she has this magnetic presence, and she plays all of her characters with this aura. For better or for worse, that aura does end up helping and hurting her movies. Some of the directors, like Tarsem Singh, are able to use her in a way like he did in The Cell, where he dresses her in these lavish outfits and she's exuding this ethereal presence in dream sequences that lets you know that there's been a real thought that he's put into the way that he's using her in this movie. Her mere presence is not just making your movie look better, but it's also helping to deliver on the vibe of the movie and what you're looking for. It doesn't seem like she's had that consistent run of being properly used in movies, but that lightning in a bottle still does happen to this day. Look no further than her performance in Hustlers from 2019, where she's still putting off that energy. But that isn't the only aspect of that character. She gets to play that role with a real dose of realness and make that character and movie as delightful as it is. Here's to hoping that Lopez can go on another run where she can keep finding those roles that treat her as the superstar she is. Because quite frankly, it's a one-of-a-kind presence that even supersedes most other movie stars. And creatives should be banging down the door to get to work with her. Thanks again for joining us on this episode of 5 Year Windows. If you could, leave a like on the video and subscribe down below. It'd be greatly appreciated and we'll keep you in the loop for when the next video drops. If you have some other actors or actresses you think would be good subjects for the show, please leave those suggestions down in the comments. Our subject next week is going to be the career of Leonardo DiCaprio from 2002 to 2006. Again, thanks so much for watching and have a great day.